Hello, everyone. I found this a few days ago and thought it was rather intriguing. Tengri 137, and thought I would just add maybe some insight to it for in case this ends up being useful to anyone that's out there working on this. I'm probably one of the few individuals who have a background both in biblical languages and studying the Bible and doing some of this lower level programming that upon which some of this math is done here. So I haven't really drawn a strong conclusion as to what I think this is. I know there's a lot of speculation going back and forth between whether this is just a fabrication or is this authentic, and I guess I'll get to a conclusion by the end of this here. So I'm just going to go through and comment on some of the things that I have particular knowledge of. And if this is a fabrication, it's a rather entertaining one, probably one of the best ones I've seen. I like how they incorporated the, Druidic alphabet there, and then also put in these pictures of things you could go out and look up on the internet and actually find the source documents of these ancient symbols that kind of point toward, higher level intelligent things in the antediluvian era. And then most of these ones at the beginning are other religions that I don't have particular knowledge of. But it doesn't surprise me that the stuff is in there. So these boxes. I haven't gone through the effort to actually decode all these, but it isn't clear to me that how these boxes relate directly to what's below it, except that they all add up 666 in every direction, which I know some people have said, like, these are really hard to create. I don't actually think so, especially if you know how to use computers. If you notice in all these ones that add up to 666, the things are almost all there. So in every slot going across, there's something that's almost 666 already, and then the rest is just filling in small numbers. It's interesting, but to me, that's not all that impressive. And one thing that did stand out to me, like revelation, one of the things that can lend credence to this being an authentic thing is, that for most people, it's kind of a little leap there from revelation to revelation. But in biblical Hebrew, the letter for B and V are pretty much the same character. And can be interchangeable. Let's see. Yep, so this is the letter bet. So if it's in that dot, that makes it a B sound. If it's not there, it can also be pronounced as a V sound. So seeing that BV, interchangeability kind of seems to indicate that someone knew something about, the ancient language that these texts are written behind. And so all four of these that they list here are the four verses in the Bible that relate to 666. And the Bible's very well known for having lots of interesting math like this in it. And then the next, there's a lot of circles and stuff, and there's another thing that ties into Odin. I don't doubt that all this math is accurate. It is impressive, but just one thing I know kind of intellectually is that math with circles is always kind of interesting. So circle math, and I don't know backgrounds here, so I'm going to kind of skip over that stuff. Abraham, Levi, and Ishmael in the Bible, where all three of these figures live to be 137 years old, and 137 being a pretty interesting prime number. It's like a prime number made of prime numbers, almost. So yeah, that is another interesting thing, and so there's some math around that. So here we get to the divine name. And this is the one that I find to be the most interesting, that I'll probably talk the most about here. So they go to Exodus 3, 14, and 15, which is an interesting correlation that he points out to being pi 3.1415. That is interesting. That, you know, that would be a hard thing to fake, and then this is the famous passage, I am that I am. This is my name forever and ever. So that is kind of cool. And then to the divine name in particular, so they kind of like write it in a strange way. So it seems like they're indicating that the yod and then the hey would be pi, and then this character here is a vav, which is another letter V that's always the letter V in Hebrew, and then another hey. And so if I go over to the Tetragrammatron, I'm terrible at pronouncing that, but it's the divine name in Hebrew. You can see this is what it looks like in the current Aramaic block script. Yod, hey, vav, hey. And then what kind of gets missed in some of the other videos is these other forms up here. So these are actually the original Hebrew before the Jews went into exile to Babylon. So this is how it would have originally been written in the original text. And this is kind of problematic as far as this document goes, because this document like claims that this was all, preserved by the sentient being. Whoever's behind and planted these codes in our things have preserved these names through the years. This kind of flies in the face of that a little bit, because it obviously has not been preserved in its original form. And in its original form, it is not as clear that these characters should correspond to pi, or that this should correspond to 7. I mean, maybe a little, but kind of not really here. And then this one kind of looks more like a Z rather than a 7 as well, whereas the Aramaic block script down here is, you can see it more clearly there. Now, the thing that's interesting about this that does lend some credence to it is that the divine name in Hebrew, they always, as far as we know, have had prohibitions against like doing any kind of messing with this, pronouncing it. In fact, if you go to like Hebrew or Jewish liturgy, and they're reading the Torah out loud, wherever they get to this, they just say Adonai, which isn't at all what it should be pronounced like. But no one wants to pronounce it. No one wants to mess with this thing, because they have this belief that if they messed with it, they could actually destroy the universe. This is an actual thing in Judaism that you could go look up. That's how much reverence they had for making sure this thing was intact, which kind of does lend credence again to the idea that this could be an authentic thing, because there clearly has been this tradition in the people that have been charged with preserving this thing, that this thing must be preserved. And it goes so far as to, let's see here, Divine Name Dead Sea Scrolls. So they even went so far as to, when they got exiled to Babylon, I'll pull this one up here. So the Jews get exiled and conquered, and they go to Babylon, and then they switch to the Babylonian, which is that Aramaic block script for the most part. And then they're there for a while, and then eventually they're able to return to Israel and return to Jerusalem. And then after that happens, they come back with the Babylonians' alphabet, which they continue using. And this is from the Dead Sea Scrolls, but one interesting thing about it is even though this is all the Aramaic block script, whenever they get down to the divine name, they had this idea that this thing must be preserved so much that they didn't even convert it to Aramaic block script at this time. They leave it in that Phoenician kind of Paleo-Hebrew kind of text where they're still faithfully writing it as they were before the exile, even though they switched over, everything else in their text. Presumably to be more compatible with whatever they had to learn for the area that they were, captured and brought back to. And the story is a little interesting behind there. So Isaiah here prophesies the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile to Babylon. And it's interesting what he says here, because it seems like the people have kind of like lost their way as to how to ascertain truth. And it gets kind of outlined in these verses here. And they seem like they're kind of relevant because this whole exercise is in, trying to ascertain what the truth of reality is here, right? So this is what Isaiah prophesied. Whom shall he teach knowledge, and to whom shall he make understood doctrine, them that are weaned from milk and drawn from the breasts? For precept must be built upon precept and upon precept, and line upon line upon line, a little here, a little there. For with stammering lips another tongue will speak to this people, which I believe this is the people of Babylon they're about to be exiled to whom he said, this is the rest wherewith ye may cause the weary to rest. And this is refreshing, yet they would not hear. But the word of the Lord was upon the precept upon precept, precept upon precept, line upon line upon line, a little here, a little there, that they might go and fall backward and be broken and snared and taken. Wherefore ye hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men that rule this people which is in Jerusalem. So at this time they're in Jerusalem, they're feeling safe, they've kind of abandoned the truth and fallen into hedonism, and then this is where the Lord's telling them, no, I'm going to exile you, where you're going to be broken and ensnared, and then you're going to be forced to go back into basics and learning that everything's built upon the ideas that precede it before it. And so they go into Babylon, they take back this block script, they're still trying to keep the divine name even at the time of the writing of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it does eventually fold into Yod He Vav He with the Aramaic block script. So I think it is a bit of a stretch, the case they're making there, but that seems to be what they're doing. And there's another particular problem that, unless you have studied Hebrew, there's a very insidious and blasphemous thing that's taking place here. So they're saying pi, is basically the same as hey, but there's actually a Hebrew character that is more like pi than hey is. and that is the character chet. So let me pull this over here. So this here, I'll zoom in a bit. This is the word halal, which means to profane in Hebrew. Neither shalt thou profane. And you could see it's actually closer looking to pi, because the only difference between hay and chet is there's a little spot right here on the hay that it is left open. So here is halal, and this is to praise. And this word is shared in Arabic, which is why you hear all the Muslims asking, is food halal? That's because it is, is it praiseworthy? Is it sacred? Is it praiseworthy? Is it sacred? These characters are similar to each other, and they're inversions of each other. So hay is a soft H sound, like ha, halal. And wherever you see this, it tends to be more on the righteous side of things. So this character makes this word be like, praise the Lord, the Lord's worthy to be worshipped and is good, associated with good and holy things. Now, when you switch that to halal here, it inverts the meaning. So now we're talking about wicked and profane and evil things. And depending on how seriously you take religious ideas, what you're doing here, whether they're doing it explicitly or inadvertently, they are inverting those characters from the holy character to the profane character. So you might actually be able to make a pretty good case just based on that the consciousness behind this, instead of being the holy Lord, might be the unholy Lord. And what are they trying to say here in regards to what we've traditionally thought and understood to be true with religious beliefs? So that is a very interesting observation here that I didn't want that to go unnoticed. And then thus comes the gigantic calculations here. So they show how if you take it to mean pi in this, it ends up meaning the fine structure construct, or the 137 if you invert it, which are important numbers in math. So that is interesting. And then you get to this thing, which seems to have blown everyone's minds, because we're now dealing with numbers that are just so astronomically large that it's almost impossible to wrap our human minds around this. So if you take these numbers, like 2 times 23 times 409 times this ungodly number, and then something that's even twice as large as it, you multiply all that out, you get something that's got to be so gigantically huge that if you were to try to do this calculation on paper, it would just go on forever, and you would probably make an error along the way and not come out with the right thing. Same story for the number below it. Now, putting my skeptic hat on here and wanting to say, if I wanted to do this fraudulently and make it seem like I did something amazing here, what I would start with is, what do I want to include in here? So we got the fine construct, we got the 137th, the 666, the 777, we got 888. And then we got pi, the golden ratio, and the speed of light in a vacuum. So all embedded in this long string of numbers, at which some people have said this is a will take a billion years to calculate. I don't think it would do that unless you were trying to go about it in a really simplistic way. So if you're trying to write a program that would cycle through all these different combinations until you got the right number, sure, that might take a billion years. But what you really need to do if you're trying to make a fraud out of this, start with what you want to get at. So you'd want to get at this number. And then, so what do I have to do in order to calculate here? So then this is a matter of, like, if you're a computer programmer, you can't just do this out of the box, because these numbers are so astronomically huge that they're outside the bounds of all data types that are currently commonly used. So you'd actually have to make a specialized class that would be able to handle doing the calculations on numbers that are just this gigantic, which can be done. So assuming you do that, then all you need to do is kind of iterate through what the top number could be divided by the bottom number, and then does it, calculate out the number you need. And then if not, depending on whether it goes over or under the target bounds, you probably just that'll probably indicate whether you need to change the top number or the bottom number. So you do that, and then that cuts out a huge amount of unnecessary calculations if you're trying to just go through it headlong in every conceivable combination, because now you're sticking to only calculations that are within the narrow lane that are heading in the right direction. So you just keep jiggling these numbers back and forth, and then eventually you'll get to an astronomical number above divided by an astronomical number below, and it'll get the target of what you're trying to calculate to. So that's one way you could go about doing that. And then once you know what these two astronomical numbers are, then you can also write some software to kind of go through the prime number lists, which are publicly available. So you can once you have the big number, you just kind of start dividing. How can I use prime numbers to kind of cut it down at each level until you get to something that's more, something a person can wrap their mind out, which is 2 times 23 times 499 times this number times that number divided by something that's equally astronomical. And this seems like impossible to probably the average person who is not a mathematician or isn't familiar with how enumeration math and different base systems work. So in programming, there's enumeration type of math where as things go on an exponential curve, you can predictably tell when a calculation is no longer going to affect calculations that came before it. So here we got number 1. So typical basis level thing is 1 or 0, yes or no. And then once you move past that, you got 2. And then there's nothing you could do before it to arrive at 2, because 2 is the new cap. So from 2, you could add 2 plus 1, and you get 3. But no matter what you could do, you can never get to 4. So now 4 and above will completely be unaffected by whatever you have that's holding the place for your data before it. And then the same goes for 8, because 4 plus 2 plus 1 is 7. That's the highest you could ever get, is 8. And then 16, and this goes on where you just keep doubling the numbers, and this is true. And I suspect that is what is going on here, where you have these small numbers, and it's not exactly perfect, but it kind of is along the same idea, where you get the small number times something that can't really mess with what came before it, times another number times something that's exponentially huge at each interval here. And that's how you can, like if you're a programmer programming these things, and this isn't even something the average programmer would know because these kinds of math are now kind of done inside programming frameworks for them. So no one, unless you've been programming for 25 years like I have, has really had to actually do this in any real way. And then prime numbers also tend to have interesting math. So I'm sure that's why they're all divisible by prime numbers, because that's the idyllic way to go about doing this. But if I were to make the case that this is just someone trolling, I think that's probably about how they went about this piece. Because it does look to the average person who's not familiar with all these concepts that this is indeed an amazing thing. All right, and here we have some more cubes. These kind of problematic in the same way, where the goal number is almost practically achieved, and then you just kind of really small numbers by comparison. Can be easily done by computers. There is one mistake I noticed on here. So he says Job 15:3 here, which he labels down here as this verse, but this is actually Job 15:2. When I looked it up, so I think what he probably did is copied the wrong verse, and is, it's probably quite a feat to keep track of all this. So you're bound to make a mistake here or there. So it's not actually should a wise man utter in vain knowledge and his belly rest with the east wind. It's actually should he reason with unprofitable talk or good, or with speeches wherewith he can do no good. Which is, in context of those other verses, this makes a lot more sense, and I wanted to point out wherewith he can do no good. This word is not in the sense of good versus bad, but in the sense of useful versus not useful. In Hebrew, there's a word tov, and that word is the good versus bad word. So this word ya'al, here we could see it's used 19 times as profit, 19 or one time as at all, one time as set forward, one as good, one as profitable. So if we go back here, he's basically saying should he reason with unprofitable talk or with speeches wherewith he can do no good? So, or with speeches where, nothing good can come from it, nothing useful you're going to walk away with. And that is what he's saying. It's not actually the east wind here. And just the Bible scholar in me, whenever you see people cutting verses and pasting them together like this is very bad hermeneutics. Anyone who just takes lines out of the Bible, you can pretty much make it say whatever you want it to say. So like I said before, I didn't do all the math, so I'm not sure how they mathematically tied this together, but not the strongest way to convey truth, to take unrelated scriptures together and then pile them together like they are related. And I do like how they put together these images in here of actual paintings that you could see from a long time ago that kind of seem to invoke almost a more visceral or instinctive emotion in you. And it's about to get into genes here, and I think that is what they are going for here. So I do follow genetic stuff sometimes, and there is a theory out there that we have genetic memory. And I heard someone reference a study where they did something like they took some rats, sprayed a particular smell, and then shocked the rats, and it really like made an indelible memory, so that whenever they smelled the smell, they would begin having a visceral reaction to it, like, oh no, we associate pain with this smell, so they're getting ready for something to come at them as soon as the smell comes. And that just seems like a Pavlovian dog thing. But the interesting part of it was then, those rats had babies, and then they took the parent rats out, have the baby rats spray that smell, and then the baby rats, kind of had anxiety for that smell as well. Which does seem to indicate that there is some kind of level of genetic memory, maybe. Which is kind of something that I do believe probably exists, and I've toyed around with a little bit a few times in my life with experimenting with things along those lines. Like, for example, like one of the things, I'm a little overweight, so I'll occasionally get 50-pound weights and go run up and down my apartment stairs 5 times. And then I'll be exhausted by the end of that. And one time I was doing this at night in winter, and the lower level light was out. And so even though I know I'm behind locked doors and I'm at a place where everyone can hear me, that lower level's creepy looking, and people seem to universally have a fear of creepiness like that. They don't want to go into dimly lit places, because our instincts tell us that if there's something waiting to ambush us, that is where it would be waiting. And that level of reasoning is not at all, it has to do with anything higher level or with objective reality. It's simply good for me versus bad for me logic. And so I the first few times I can force myself down there because I know there's nothing there. If there was someone there, I would have saw them. I would hear them. If something happened, people would hear me. So I know intellectually this is not a threatening situation. But as I go up and down the stairs, around by the 4th time, my instincts are just going nuts. Because now I'm just totally exhausted. If there was someone there to attack me, I'd be totally unable to defend myself because I am just so tired from the exercises I did. And I couldn't actually get the rational part of my brain to override and go down there. It was like my instincts had taken over and said, no way am I letting you down in that crazy area. Because I know better than your rational part that if there is something down there, if there's something that's going to get us, that's where it's going to be hanging out. And that's like the kind of stuff that when I see these images, they kind of elicit that response in me. And then I also I have 2 children, one of which has mild autism due to a genetic defect that he has. And I have noticed between the 2 kids that one of them, the normal one, my daughter, when she sees things like on TV, like a shark with teeth, ever since she was a kid and before she could talk, she knew things like that were scary. Whereas my son with the genetic defect that may have messed up this kind of genetic memory type of stuff, just thought it was hilarious. And then, as a parent, that kind of freaks you out a little bit because you realize your kid doesn't have any instinct to gauge threatening situations, so you got to really grind that into him. So personally, I do believe there's something to that, and I think that's kind of why these creepy kind of images are there. They're there to get us to hearken back to patterns that we have seen as a people over and over again in our genetic history. And then it didn't surprise me that the next puzzle, lo and behold, seems to jump toward genetics, which is what these little constructs are the chemical markers of what makes up DNA as I understand it. And this is where it seems to be left, with this being some kind of encryption key that is supposed to decompress something in the brain of the chosen person, as this seems to go. So before I go on any further, a few more notes that I want to make that I haven't covered yet. The chapter and verse numbers in the Bible, they came late. It is interesting that it isn't part of the puzzle. But things that come late like that need to have an added level of skepticism, because they come after critical events that may, in the worldview of the person who's injecting these things in, may impose on it a meaning that didn't exist before. And in these Hebrew texts, that is especially true. So Hebrew is a language. It's an ancient language. So back when it first developed, people were basically hunter-gatherers, and things like parchment or paper or clay that you wanted to write your ideas down on, these were all really expensive things to get that took a lot of time and effort to make. So they were as efficient as they could possibly be. They left no margins, no spaces in between words. They even cut out vowels, because in Hebrew, the vowels are always pretty much the same depending on the binyan of the word. So you can know by some of the consonants around it what form the word is and what vowels should be there. So the earliest people didn't even bother writing the vowel sounds down. They only stuck straight to consonants. And then later on, a group of rabbis came around, the Masoretes added these vowels to the text, and this is post-Christianity now. So especially in verses that deal with the Messiah, wherever they had a chance to use vowels to kind of twerk the meaning of words, I would argue that that's exactly what they did. So, I mean, the vowels can mean something, these things can mean things, but they're not at the same level of the original raw text that was there before. So I think for anyone that's diving in deep at this level, that is something important to note. So I think that's about all that I have. So what I actually think with this, into the is it authentic or is it just a troll debate, I think what we could have here is maybe a third option where it seems to me, just reading through it, like it feels like whoever did this put a lot of work into it. So that is definitely something a troll can do, but I think we could be looking at something where someone who really likes math, thinks they figured out something, and someone speaking to them through numbers, and they put all this stuff together of how they think it probably is, and are almost putting this out there like a prophecy. I think we may have a sincere believer or sincere set of believers that came up with this thing and kind of put this out there, and then the test of their faith will be to see if this unlocks something in someone's brain, and then we'll have this super awesome, presumably master teacher that will lead us away from self-destruction. Otherwise, they seem to indicate that we're doomed if we don't find this person and get this puzzle in front of them. So it's an interesting idea. And I personally think that the third way is probably what we have on our hands. I think we have someone that probably believes this, but whether it's objectively true or not, who can say? Or maybe it could work out even worse. Maybe these people do believe this sincerely, but what if it were, instead of unlocking the next great leader that will guide us into the shining future, what if it were, it unlocked the quasi divine nature that was meant for a human being without sin, but in a state where a human was still sinful, and brought about the incarnation of the actual archetypal Antichrist. Um, and I know some people are out there making the case for that too, and I think they have a good argument to make, based on the Christian tradition, the prevalence of 666 all over inside this document as well, and also the swapping the hey for the chet character, and in so doing, inverting the divine name to something profane. I think that is a strong, you could make a strong case like that. Yep. And just another interesting factoid, the preterist school of eschatology, who says that the Antichrist happened way back then in that same generation. If you look up Kaiser Nero and add up, transliterate the Greek letters back into Hebrew, add those all up, and that adds up to 666. I kind of personally subscribe to a progressive preterism. I don't think everything happened back then, but I think so long as humanity keeps going, these archetypes will keep popping up. Where you have these strong characters that'll pop up and try to like replace God with some kind of ubermensch idea of man, asserting himself into the divine world, and then by the end of it making a big bloody mess. And I could see how that could, be the case with the world getting as unstable as it is. And it's been about 100 years since we had people like that take power, who tried to replace God with their own ideas of what an epic humanity should be like, and then just made a big bloody mess. Like the last big ones would be like your Stalin, Mao, even to some degree Hitler, types of characters that kind of were casting away traditional human religious ideas and trying to replace it, and then just killed a lot of people. And if this were to be true, and it were to unlock some kind of superhuman nature here with this, I think that person could prove to be the Antichrist, if they're in a fallen state. But anyways, I'll leave it there, and I'll leave some, or at least a way to contact me in case anyone out there thinks that they come across something that they don't quite understand and would like to ask me about. If you think that I can help you in your code cracking in the future, look in the comments, not the comments, but the description below. I'll have something in there on how you can reach me. Have a great day, guys.